I leaned back, folding my arms, trying to protect myself from something I couldn't name yet. You're very confident. His gaze softened just a fraction. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Outside, a car passed, headlights washing briefly over the window, over his face. For a split second, I saw something else there, something human. Tired. Heavy. Gone just as fast. Say I agree, I said. Say I'm stupid enough to even think about it. He nodded, encouraging me to continue. What does that make me? I asked. To you? The question lingered between us, fragile and dangerous. Adrian Vale studied me like the answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. That, he said slowly, depends on how honest we're willing to be. My pulse raced. Why did every part of me feel like it was leaning forward, even as my mind screamed to run? The waitress returned with our coffee, setting the mugs down carefully, unaware that my world was quietly cracking open at the seams. Steam curled up between us, warm and fleeting. I wrapped my hands around the mug, grounding myself in the heat. Across from me, Adrian Vale waited. And I had the unsettling, impossible feeling that no matter what I chose next, I was already standing at the edge of something I couldn't step back from. And that night, he chose my booth. Out of all the empty seats in that diner, out of all the ways my night could have ended, he slid into the cracked vinyl across from me like it had always been his place. Like the universe had reserved it. Like I'd been waiting without knowing it. I don't understand, I said, fingers tightening around my chipped mug. The coffee had gone lukewarm, bitter, but I kept drinking it anyway, like punishing myself. Why me? The question came out softer than I intended. Not defensive. Not angry. Curious. Afraid. His gaze flicked to my hands. Then to my face. Slow. Intimate. Like he was memorizing me, not just the way I looked, but the way I held myself together. The way my shoulders stayed tense even when I was sitting down. The way my eyes kept darting to the door, like escape was muscle memory. Because you don't belong to my world, he said finally. And because you won't fall in love. The words landed harder than I expected. That should have offended me. It should have made me bristle, stand up, tell him exactly what he could do with his assumptions. Men had underestimated me my whole life, and I'd learned to resent it. To guard against it. Instead, my stomach flipped. Heat spread low and unexpected, curling somewhere it had no business being. My breath caught, just a little, and I hated myself for it. Why did that sound like a challenge instead of an insult? I should walk away, I told myself. This is insane. This is dangerous. Why am I still sitting here? I shifted in the booth, the vinyl squeaking beneath me, trying to put space between us even though he hadn't moved an inch. My knee bumped the table leg. My pulse skidded. He didn't rush me. That was the worst part. He just watched. Patient. Certain. Like time bent around him, not the other way around. Then he slid a folder across the table. The cardboard made a soft, final sound as it stopped inches from my mug. I didn't touch it at first. I stared at it like it might explode. Like opening it would make everything real. What's that? I asked, even though my chest already knew. Information, he said calmly. I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. Slowly, like I was afraid of what I'd find, I pulled the folder toward me and opened it. The world narrowed. Copies of my debts. Not summaries, actual documents. Loan statements. Past due notices. The hospital letter with my mother's name printed in cold black ink. The eviction notice, stamped and dated, the one I'd folded and unfolded so many times the paper had gone soft at the edges. Things I hadn't told anyone. Things I hadn't even said out loud to myself. My hands started to shake. I snapped the folder shut and looked up at him, my heart slamming so hard it hurt. How did you? I don't spy on you, he said calmly, reading my panic with unsettling ease. I prepare. The word echoed. Prepare. Like this wasn't reckless. Like this wasn't impulsive. Like I wasn't a gamble, but a calculated choice. The diner felt too small suddenly. The neon lights too bright. Every sound too loud. I lowered my voice. You had no right. You're right, he said. No argument. No defensiveness. But I wasn't asking for permission. Something in his honesty disarmed me more than an apology would have. I pressed my lips together, trying to slow my breathing. What's the catch? There it was. The part where the price revealed itself. 1 month, he said. Simple. Measured. We live together. Publicly married. Appearances matter. After that, you walk away clean. No debts. No obligations. No one comes looking for you. Publicly married. The words rang in my ears like a bell struck too hard. No strings, he added. No strings. I almost laughed at the lie in that. I looked down at my hands again, at the faint coffee stain on my thumb, at the small scar near my wrist from a childhood accident I barely remembered. I thought about my mother's tired smile. About the hollow feeling in my apartment when I turned off the lights at night to save electricity. I thought about how tired I was of being scared. This is crazy, I whispered. Yes, he agreed. But it's effective. I met his eyes. And if I say no? He held my gaze, unblinking. Then nothing changes. And everything stays hard. That did it. I agreed before I could lose my nerve. The word yes felt like jumping off something tall, terrifying and oddly relieving all at once. Like there was no going back, and maybe that was the point. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded, once, like he'd been expecting it. That night, I moved into his house. I expected excess. Marble floors. Gold accents. Something loud and arrogant. Instead, it was quiet. A private estate on the edge of the city, tucked behind tall iron gates and old trees that cast long shadows even under security lights. The air felt different there, controlled, insulated from the chaos beyond the walls. The house itself was modern but restrained. Clean lines. Neutral colors. Everything chosen with intention, nothing wasted. It felt less like a home and more like a stronghold. High walls. Minimal staff. Rooms that felt more like restraint than luxury. Someone took my bag. Someone else handed me a glass of water I didn't remember asking for. Adrian stayed close, not touching, but always there, like a gravity I couldn't escape. He showed me the layout without commentary. The living areas. The dining room. The office doors I wasn't supposed to open. Then the hallway. His bedroom was down one side. Mine was directly across. The symmetry made my pulse jump. The door stays unlocked, he said as he handed me a slim keycard. For appearances. My fingers closed around it, cool and smooth. My pulse jumped so hard I felt dizzy. Why did that sentence feel like a warning and an invitation? I nodded, afraid to speak. Afraid my voice would betray me. That first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of a house that never truly slept. Every sound felt amplified, the distant footsteps of security, the low murmur of voices somewhere far away. Across the hall, I could sense him. Not hear. Not see. Just feel. The first week was unbearable. He said it like a business offer, not a proposal. "Marry me for 1 month," the Mafia boss said quietly, leaning across the scarred wooden table, "and you get the inheritance money." That was the moment my life tilted, right there in a 24-hour diner that smelled of burnt coffee and desperation, at 2:13 a.m., while my eviction notice sat folded in my bag like a loaded weapon. The diner was almost empty, the way it always was at that hour. One tired waitress wiping the same counter over and over. A trucker asleep in a booth with his cap pulled low. Neon lights buzzing softly above us, flickering just enough to make everything feel slightly unreal, like the world was holding its breath. Outside, the street was quiet, hollow, the kind of silence that made you feel small and exposed. I remember thinking how strange it was that my life could change in a place like this. Vinyl seats cracked with age. A chipped mug warming my hands. Sugar packets scattered like tiny white flags of surrender. I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I didn't ask if he was insane. I just stared at him. Because something in his voice told me he wasn't joking, and something in my chest told me this was going to ruin me. He sat across from me like he belonged there and didn't at the same time. Too composed. Too still. The booth felt too small for him, like the space was bending around his presence. He hadn't ordered anything yet. Just sat there, elbows resting lightly on the table, fingers relaxed, eyes locked on mine as if he were waiting for me to catch up. "Say something," he murmured. His voice was low. Calm. Not rushed. Not apologetic. The kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. I swallowed. My throat felt dry, tight, like I'd forgotten how to use it. "You don't even know me." A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. Something sharper. "I know enough." That made my skin prickle. I glanced down, instinctively pressing my bag closer to my side. Inside it, my entire life reduced to paper. Bills. Final notices. The letter with the bold red date I couldn't stop seeing every time I closed my eyes. "People don't say things like that to strangers," I said quietly. "Not unless they want something." His gaze flicked to the bag. Just for a second. Then back to my face. "I want a solution," he replied. "So do you." My pulse thudded in my ears. Why did it feel like he could hear it? Why did it feel like every word he spoke was peeling something open inside me? I forced myself to sit up straighter. "You're assuming a lot." "I am," he agreed easily. "But I'm rarely wrong." There was a pause then. Not awkward. Heavy. Loaded. The kind of silence that made everything sharper, the hum of the lights, the distant clink of dishes, my own breathing sounding too loud in my head. I studied him the way you do when you're trying to find the trick. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair cut neatly, no wasted movement, no nervous habits. His hands were clean, well kept, but there was something in them, strength held back, like he was used to choosing restraint instead of chaos. Danger wrapped in control. "My name is Mara." I'd never been the girl men like him noticed. I didn't grow up thinking the world owed me anything. I wasn't raised around luxury or danger or whispered power. I was raised around overdue rent, grocery lists calculated down to the last coin, and the unspoken rule that you don't ask for help unless you're ready to be disappointed. I learned early how to stretch meals. How to cut pills in half. How to smile at work even when panic curled tight in my stomach. I learned how to survive quietly. Invisible, if possible. I worked the night shift at a private storage facility. The kind of place where people hid the parts of their lives they didn't want to look at: old furniture, broken dreams, memories sealed in cardboard boxes. It was boring. Lonely. Predictable. Safe. Or at least it used to be. Until him. Until the way he looked at me now made my heart beat faster for reasons that had nothing to do with fear alone. "My name is Mara," I said, more to ground myself than to introduce anything. Saying it out loud reminded me that I was real. That I existed beyond this moment. He nodded once, like he'd already known that too. Adrian Vale, he replied. The name landed heavier than it should have. I didn't gasp. I didn't react. But something shifted inside me all the same. I'd heard it before. Not directly. Never in conversation. Always in passing. Half-finished sentences. Lowered voices. Warnings that didn't sound like warnings until you learned better. People didn't say it out loud often. When they did, they leaned closer. Checked their surroundings. Spoke like the walls might remember. Adrian Vale. Power wrapped in stillness. The kind of man who didn't need to threaten, you just felt the threat in the air when he walked in. I searched his face for exaggeration. For arrogance. For the kind of confidence that begged to be challenged. I didn't find it. Instead, I found patience. Focus. A quiet certainty that made my chest tighten. Right, I said slowly. And you expect me to believe this is real? He leaned back slightly, giving me space without actually moving away. A calculated courtesy. I expect you to consider it. Why? The word slipped out before I could soften it. Why me? His eyes held mine. Didn't flinch. Didn't wander. There was something unsettling about that alone. Because you're tired, he said. My breath caught. He continued, voice steady, almost gentle. Because you haven't slept properly in weeks. Because your hands shake when you think no one is watching. Because you're carrying a letter in your bag that you've read so many times you could recite it. Heat crawled up my neck. You don't know anything about me. I know what desperation looks like, he said. And I know what kind of people don't abuse an opportunity when they're given one. I laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because the sound had nowhere else to go. You're asking me to trust you. No, he corrected softly. I'm asking you to see that this benefits us both. A rehook tugged sharp in my chest. Us. Like we were already connected. The waitress approached then, her footsteps breaking the tension like a dropped plate. You ready to order, hon? Adrian didn't look away from me. Coffee. Black. She glanced at me. I hesitated, then nodded. Same. When she walked away, the space between us felt louder than before. What happens if I say no? I asked. He tilted his head, considering. Then you finish your coffee. You go to work tonight. You keep pretending you're fine until the day pretending costs you something you can't get back. That hit too close. I gripped the edge of the table. You talk like you've already decided. I have, he said. You haven't yet. Another pause. Another stretch of silence thick enough to drown in. I tried to imagine standing up. Walking out. Letting the bell above the door ring behind me. Going back to my life exactly as it was. Why did that feel more terrifying than staying? What's the worst part? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, convincing yourself it doesn't mean anything. My heart stuttered. Why did that sound like a warning instead of reassurance? The tension lived everywhere. In the silence at breakfast, where we sat across from each other like polite strangers playing house. In the way he stood too close when correcting my posture for the cameras, his hand hovering at my back without quite touching. In how his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking, dark and unreadable. We shared dinners. We shared a last name. We did not touch. And yet, every night, I felt him. His presence pressed through walls. Through reason. Through sleep. I would wake up with my heart racing, convinced he was standing just outside my door. Sometimes I opened it, just to prove to myself I was imagining things. The hallway was always empty. I hated how aware I was of him. Of the scent of his shirts when I passed the laundry room, clean, sharp, unmistakably his. Of the sound of his voice late at night, low and controlled on phone calls he took behind closed doors. Of the way he loosened his collar when he was tired, like even his restraint needed relief. Why him? Why like this? Why did I feel more alive walking through his house than I ever had in my own life? At breakfast one morning, he slid a cup of coffee toward me without looking up. Exactly how I liked it. Cream. 1 sugar. My chest tightened. You remembered, I said. He shrugged slightly. You drink it every day. I wanted to ask how many other things he noticed. I didn't. Later, he adjusted my ring before we left the house, his fingers brushing my skin for half a second too long. Neither of us spoke. The silence screamed. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body humming with things I refused to name. My thoughts spiraled, looping back to him no matter how hard I tried to redirect them. This isn't real, I told myself. This is an arrangement. This ends. So why does it already feel like it's changing me? Across the hall, a door closed softly. My breath caught. I turned onto my side, hugging the pillow to my chest, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to understand yet. Because even without touching, even without promises, he was already everywhere. The first shock came on day 8. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself with raised voices or slammed doors. It came quietly, slipped under my skin, and stayed there, persistent, electric, impossible to ignore. It was late. Past midnight. The house had that hollow stillness that only arrives when everyone else is asleep and you're alone with your thoughts. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, careful on the cool stone floor, half asleep and restless in a way I couldn't explain. I was wearing one of his shirts. Not intentionally. Not to provoke anything. It had just been there, clean, soft, folded on top of my still unpacked box of clothes. My own things were buried somewhere beneath paperwork and shoes and the fragments of a life I hadn't quite unpacked yet. His shirt was easy. Comfortable. Too big. It smelled like him. That should have been my first warning. I stood by the counter, sipping water straight from the glass, the hem of the shirt brushing my thighs every time I shifted my weight. I told myself I was calm. That I was just tired. That the faint buzz in my chest meant nothing. Then he walked in. No announcement. No footsteps I heard in time. Just presence. I felt him before I saw him, the way the air changed, the way my shoulders tightened instinctively, like my body recognized him faster than my mind could catch up. He froze. Completely still. Like he'd walked into something he hadn't prepared for. For one suspended second, the dangerous calm cracked. His eyes locked onto me, dark and sharp, then dropped slowly, too slowly, taking in the way the shirt hung on my body, the bare skin beneath it, the intimacy of something that belonged to him resting so casually against me. That's mine, he said. His voice was different. Lower. Stripped of its usual control. I know, I replied, too quickly. Too breathless. The words barely made it past my lips. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing off the cabinets. His eyes dropped again. Lingered. Heat flared in the room, thick, undeniable, like a match struck too close to skin. I felt it everywhere. In my chest. In my thighs. In the way my fingers curled around the glass until my knuckles ached. Don't do that again, he said hoarsely. It should have sounded like an order. Instead, it sounded like a plea. Why? I asked before my fear could stop me. The question slipped out on instinct, carried by something reckless and raw that had been building in me all week. I didn't know why I said it. Only that once it was out there, I couldn't pull it back. His jaw tightened. I saw the muscle flex. His hands clenched at his sides, like he was physically holding himself in place. Because I won't stop myself next time. The words hit me low and slow. My knees almost gave out. For a moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen felt smaller. The silence louder. Every breath I took felt like it brushed against him. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the moment snapped. He turned away. Left the room without another word. I stood there long after he was gone, staring at the doorway, my skin buzzing, my pulse wild, my mind racing in circles. What was that? What was I doing? I went to bed that night shaking, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. After that, the jealousy started. It crept in quietly at first, disguised as curiosity. A name mentioned casually. A phone call that lasted too long. A shift in his schedule that didn't include me. Women called. I heard their voices sometimes, drifting through the hallway when he didn't close his office door all the way. Confident voices. Soft laughter. The kind of ease that came from belonging in his world. Women showed up. Beautiful, polished women who looked like they stepped out of a different life, tailored dresses, perfect hair, the kind of composure I'd never learned. They moved through his house like they knew where they were going. Like they'd been there before. I smiled when I had to. I stood beside him when appearances demanded it, my hand resting lightly on his arm, my posture perfect, my expression calm. I played the part I'd agreed to play. But inside, I burned. I burned when one of them touched his sleeve like it was nothing. When another laughed too easily at something he said. When I caught the way they looked at him, open, hungry, confident. I told myself it was ridiculous. Why does this hurt? This isn't real. This isn't supposed to matter. I repeated it like a mantra while my chest tightened anyway. One evening, a woman stayed late. Dinner ran long. Conversation spilled into the living room. I sat there with them, nodding at the right moments, feeling like an intruder in my own skin. She leaned close to him when she spoke, her voice low. Familiar. I watched his reaction too closely. He was polite. Reserved. Controlled. But not distant. That hurt more than if he'd dismissed her entirely. Later that night, after she left, I found myself pacing my room, replaying every glance, every word, every moment that had lodged itself under my ribs. Why am I like this? I thought bitterly. Why do I care? I wasn't supposed to care. This was an arrangement. A transaction. 1 month of pretending, then freedom. So why did it feel like I was losing something I'd never been promised? The next morning, I avoided him. I skipped breakfast. Took longer in the shower. Told myself I was busy when he asked if I'd be joining him for lunch. He noticed. That afternoon, he cornered me in the hallway, not physically, not aggressively. Just stood there, blocking my path without touching me. You're different today, he said quietly. I crossed my arms. Defensive. I'm fine. He studied me the way he always did, like he was reading between the words. You're not. Silence stretched. Did I do something? He asked. The question startled me. I looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty there. Not weakness. But something close. I swallowed. No. It was a lie. We both knew it. His gaze softened, then hardened again, like he was pulling himself back behind a wall. This only works if we're honest. A rehook twisted in my chest. Was he talking about the arrangement, or us? I don't get jealous, I said suddenly. The word surprised even me. I don't. He raised an eyebrow. Is that so? I don't, I repeated, more firmly. So don't flatter yourself. A pause. Then, quietly, good. The word landed wrong. Good? Why did that feel like a dismissal instead of reassurance? That night, I heard him take another call. Another woman. Another voice that wasn't mine. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling, my heart aching in a way I hadn't expected. Every rational part of me told me this was temporary, controlled, meaningless. And yet, every emotional part of me felt exposed. Unprotected. Pulled toward something I couldn't name and didn't know how to resist. By the end of that week, I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was unraveling, quietly, carefully, afraid of what would happen if I admitted the truth even to myself. Because the worst part wasn't the jealousy. It was the realization that somewhere between borrowed shirts and unspoken warnings, he had started to matter. One night, he came home injured. Not dramatic. No gunshots. No sirens. No frantic phone calls that warned me ahead of time. Just the quiet click of the door far past midnight and the unmistakable shift in the air that always announced him before I saw him. I was half asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled around my shoulders, pretending I wasn't waiting. Pretending I hadn't been counting the hours since he left. When I looked up, my breath caught. There was blood at his knuckles. Not much. Just enough to stain the skin, dark against pale, like something unfinished. His jacket was still on, his shoulders rigid, tension carved deep into his posture. He moved like everything hurt and nothing was allowed to show it. "You're awake," he said quietly. I pushed myself up before I realized I was moving. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." "It's never nothing with you," I replied, and heard the edge in my voice too late. He studied me for a moment, like he was deciding whether to argue. Then, with a small exhale, he shrugged off his jacket and let it fall over the chair. "Fine," he said. "Just, don't make it a thing." I didn't answer. I was already in the kitchen, grabbing the first aid kit with hands that felt too steady for how hard my heart was beating. I didn't ask what happened. That was the unspoken agreement between us. His world stayed sealed, locked behind doors I wasn't supposed to open. But blood had a way of blurring boundaries. I gestured toward the counter. "Sit." He hesitated, then obeyed. Up close, the damage was clearer. The skin over his knuckles was split, raw, swelling already setting in. Old bruises hid beneath new ones. My stomach twisted. "Did you win?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice neutral. A corner of his mouth lifted. "I didn't lose." I shook my head, unscrewing the antiseptic. "You shouldn't treat yourself like you're disposable." His gaze flicked up, sharp. "Careful." "I'm serious," I said, softer now. "Someone should care if you get hurt." The room went very still. I dipped a cloth into warm water and reached for his hand without asking. That was the moment something shifted. The intimacy was devastating. His breath hitched, not loud, not obvious, but enough that I felt it through my fingertips. His skin was warm, solid, too real. I cleaned the blood carefully, my thumb brushing the side of his hand, my focus narrowing to the simple act of tending to him. Mine did too. Every nerve felt exposed. Every second stretched thin. "Mara," he warned softly. It wasn't anger. It wasn't command. It was restraint. "I know," I whispered. "I know." But I didn't stop. I traced the cuts with gentle precision, aware of how close I was, aware of the way his other hand curled slowly against the counter, like he was anchoring himself. The scent of him, leather, soap, something darker underneath, wrapped around me until it felt impossible to think straight. The silence was thick, charged, humming with everything we weren't saying. That was the night the rules broke, just enough to terrify us both. No sex. No kisses. Just closeness so intense it felt more dangerous than either. When I finished, I wrapped his knuckles carefully, my fingers lingering a second too long before pulling away. He flexed his hand slightly, testing it, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You shouldn't do that," he said. "You shouldn't come home bleeding," I replied. For a moment, something like a smile flickered in his eyes. Then it vanished. He left the kitchen without another word, and I stood there long after, my hands still warm, my chest tight, knowing we'd crossed a line neither of us knew how to step back from. The second rehoop came when I overheard the truth. I wasn't supposed to be awake. Sleep had been avoiding me lately, slipping through my fingers no matter how exhausted I was. That night, I wandered the halls quietly, barefoot, drawn by voices I didn't recognize. I stopped at the top of the stairs. Below me, in his office, the lights were on. I should have turned around. Instead, I stayed. His uncle's voice echoed through the house, older, sharper, threaded with authority and expectation. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," the man said. "She's temporary." "She's clean," Adrian replied. "She's safe." The words landed heavy in my chest. A pause followed. Long enough that I leaned closer, my heart hammering. "No," Adrian continued, his voice firm now. "I won't marry one of them. I'd rather lose everything." Silence. My breath caught painfully in my throat. Lose everything, for me? I backed away slowly, retreating to my room like I'd touched something forbidden. My thoughts spiraled, tangled and breathless. He never planned to keep it. The inheritance. The power. The future that was supposed to follow this arrangement. He was willing to walk away. Because of me. I didn't sleep at all. When I confronted him the next morning, my voice shook despite my best efforts. "You never planned to keep the inheritance," I said. He froze. The stillness in his face was immediate, absolute. "You weren't supposed to know." "So it's true," I whispered. "All of it." He set his coffee down carefully, like the weight of the cup mattered more than the weight of the moment. "You were eavesdropping." "I was listening," I said. "There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "This isn't your concern." "Isn't it?" My chest burned. Was any of it real? Or was I just your shield? The question hung between us, fragile and sharp. He stepped closer. Too close. I could feel the heat of him, the tension radiating off his body. His control frayed, just at the edges. "This was supposed to be simple," he said. "You weren't supposed to get under my skin." "And yet?" I whispered, my voice barely holding together. "And yet," he admitted, voice breaking just enough, "every time you say my name, I forget who I'm supposed to be." The confession shattered something open inside me. That night, we almost crossed the line. It didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic build-up, no conscious decision made out loud. It happened the way most dangerous things do, quietly, when you're already tired, when your guard is low, when your heart has been doing too much heavy lifting for too long. The house was quiet again. Not peaceful. Not restful. The kind of quiet that presses in on you from all sides, that magnifies every breath, every shift of weight, every thought you're trying not to think. The lights were dimmed low, shadows stretching along the hallway like they were listening. We stood too close. That was the first mistake. We had stopped walking at the same time, turning toward each other without meaning to. Words abandoned somewhere behind us, unfinished, unimportant. The air between us felt charged, humming, like the moment right before a storm breaks. I could feel the heat of him. Could feel my own pulse answering it. His mouth hovered at my throat. Not touching. Not even brushing my skin. Just there. So close I could feel his breath, warm and uneven, ghosting over my collarbone. So close my skin tingled where he hadn't touched yet, every nerve ending suddenly awake and begging for more. My name trembled on his lips, barely sound at all. His hands framed my hips. Firm. Steady. Still. Not moving, asking. Waiting. The restraint in that nearly undid me. I wanted him so badly it hurt. Not just in my body, though that was undeniable, the ache low in my stomach, the way my legs felt weak, the way my breath came too fast. I wanted him in that deeper, more terrifying way. The way you want someone who has already seen you cracked open and stayed anyway. My body leaned forward on instinct, closing the distance that my mind was screaming about. My heart raced, pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. My thoughts dissolved into sensation, heat, breath, closeness, need. Everything logical told me this was a mistake. That crossing this line would change things in ways we couldn't undo. That it would tangle what was already fragile, already complicated. That desire didn't erase consequences. Everything emotional screamed that it was inevitable. That we'd been circling this moment since the beginning. That pretending otherwise was the real lie. That if I didn't take him now, I might never forgive myself. My hands twitched at my sides. I imagined reaching up. Imagined pulling him down. Imagined what his mouth would feel like against my skin, what his restraint would look like once it finally shattered. The image was almost enough to tip me over the edge. But fear won. Not fear of him. Fear of what loving him might cost. I pulled away. The movement was small, but it felt enormous. Like ripping myself out of gravity. The air rushed in between us, cold and sudden, and I hated it immediately. The look on his face, surprise, disappointment, relief all tangled together, nearly broke me. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, but I saw it. The flash of want. The flash of restraint. The quiet gratitude that I'd stopped when he wasn't sure he could. I can't, I whispered. The words scraped my throat on the way out. They sounded like surrender. Or maybe survival. He nodded once. Just once. Like he'd expected it. Like he'd been bracing for it all along. Good, he said quietly. Neither can I. There was no accusation in his voice. No bitterness. Just a shared understanding that scared me more than anger would have. We stood there another second, too long, not long enough, then he stepped back. Space returned. The moment shattered. I went to my room and shut the door, my back pressed against it as if it could hold me upright. My hands were shaking. My body felt like it was vibrating with everything I'd denied it. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt him again, his breath, his hands, the question in his stillness. I replayed the moment over and over, wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed still. If I'd leaned in just a fraction more. Would he have stopped me? Or would we have both fallen? The third rehook was the disappearance. It came without warning. No argument. No goodbye. No dramatic scene that let me prepare myself. I woke up the next morning and knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. The house felt different, hollow, off balance, like something essential had been removed. I checked my phone first. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. No explanation waiting to soften the blow. I got out of bed and walked down the hall, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the emptiness. His door was open. The room inside was immaculate, stripped of anything personal. No jacket draped over the chair. No scent lingering in the air. Gone. Empty. No, I murmured, the word barely audible. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the office doors I wasn't supposed to open. Everywhere I looked, the same answer waited for me. He had left. No note. No message. No explanation. I stood in the middle of the house, my arms wrapped around myself, trying to breathe through the sudden ache in my chest. My phone felt heavy in my hand, useless. I told myself to wait. An hour passed. Then 2. Still nothing. By the end of the day, panic had set in fully. I called once. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Pride stopped me. Or fear. I wasn't sure which. The second day was worse. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Every sound the house made felt like a reminder of his absence, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant footsteps of staff who avoided my eyes, the echo of my own movements in rooms that felt too big now. I didn't eat. I paced. I replayed everything. Did I push him away? Had I scared him? Was pulling back the wrong choice after all? I told myself he was protecting me. That leaving was his way of putting distance between me and the consequences of loving him. That he'd seen something coming that I hadn't. Then the anger crept in. I told myself he was running. That he'd felt too much and done what he always did, disappeared before it could cost him more. That he'd chosen control over connection. I didn't know which hurt more. By the third day, the house felt haunted. I paced his halls like a ghost, touching the backs of chairs he'd sat in, standing in doorways he'd filled so completely with his presence. I wandered through rooms I'd never felt fully allowed in, letting myself linger now that permission no longer mattered. Everywhere I went, memories surfaced. The lies we'd told each other, and the truths that had slipped through anyway. The looks held a second too long. The moments that felt too real to fake. The borrowed intimacy. The half-confessions whispered late at night. The way he'd looked at me like he was standing at the edge of something dangerous, and didn't know whether to jump or step back. I sat on the edge of the bed in his room, the place he'd retreated to when things got too heavy, and finally let myself cry. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet tears that soaked into my sleeves, my shoulders shaking as I tried to make sense of the emptiness he'd left behind. If he was protecting me, why did it feel like abandonment? If he was running, why did part of me understand? I lay back on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling, my chest aching with everything I hadn't said. Come back. Choose me. Don't disappear like this. The house answered with silence. And somewhere between fear and longing, between logic and heartbreak, I realized the worst part wasn't that he'd left. It was that he'd taken a piece of me with him, and I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. When he returned, something was different. He looked the same on the surface, composed, controlled, but the distance around him was palpable. He moved like a man already halfway gone. Protective in a way that felt like goodbye. I'm ending this early, he said. The words were clean. Final. My heart cracked. Why? Because loving me will destroy you. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and broken. Too late. He flinched. That was the breakdown. I packed my things with shaking hands. Folded clothes I hadn't worn yet. Closed boxes I'd never fully unpacked. Returned to my old job. My old life. It felt smaller than ever. And the emptiness he left behind was louder than anything I'd ever known. 2 weeks later, I learned the truth. Not from him. Not gently. Not in a way that let me sit down first. I learned it from a whispered phone call I wasn't meant to overhear at work. From the way my supervisor's voice dropped when she said his name. From the sudden weight in my chest that made the room tilt even before the words finished landing. He turned himself in, she said quietly. High-level charges. Voluntary surrender. The world went silent. I remember gripping the edge of the desk, my fingers going numb, my ears ringing so loudly I barely heard anything else. My first thought was that it couldn't be real. That this had to be another rumor, another half-truth that followed men like him. But rumors don't come with court dates. Rumors don't come with sealed files and armed escorts and news stories that vanish as fast as they appear. He had turned himself in. Not arrested. Not hunted. He walked in on his own. I left work without explaining. I don't remember the drive home. I don't remember stopping at red lights. I just remember the ache, sharp, constant, unforgiving, settling deep in my bones. He had sacrificed power, reputation, freedom. For me. The realization hit in waves, each one stealing my breath all over again. Every moment replayed differently now. His distance. His disappearance. The way he'd looked at me when he said he was ending it early, not cold, not cruel, but terrified. He wasn't running from me. He was running toward consequences. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. My thoughts circled endlessly, landing on the same unbearable question. Why would someone like him give up everything, for someone like me? The visit was approved faster than I expected. Maybe because he hadn't fought. Maybe because compliance looks good on paper. Maybe because even men like him are useful when they choose silence. The visiting room smelled like disinfectant and old air. Too bright. Too sterile. Every sound echoed, footsteps, voices, doors locking somewhere out of sight. I sat down, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Then he walked in. Adrian looked different. Not broken. Not defeated. But stripped. The tailored suits were gone. The effortless authority replaced by something quieter, heavier. He was thinner. His shoulders still broad, still strong, but there was a restraint in him now that hadn't been there before. Like he was carrying weight no one else could see. Our eyes met. Everything else fell away. He sat down on the other side of the glass, close enough that I could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes. Close enough that my chest hurt with the need to reach for him. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly. I laughed, a broken sound that surprised me. "You don't get to decide that." A pause. Then, quieter, "I didn't want you to see me like this." "You mean real?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "You were never part of the plan," he said softly. "You became the reason." The words hit harder than any confession. I pressed my hand to the glass without thinking. The barrier was cold, unforgiving, separating us in the cruelest possible way. He hesitated, then mirrored the gesture, his palm aligning with mine, so close it hurt. "Then marry me again," I said. The words spilled out before fear could stop them. Raw. Honest. Terrifying. Not for money. Not for lies. His breath shuddered. His eyes closed like the weight of it was too much to carry all at once. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. The old insecurity in me tried to rise. Tried to agree. Tried to retreat. I didn't let it. "Maybe," I said. "But I choose you." When he looked at me again, something in his eyes had changed, not relief, not hope exactly, but something steadier. Acceptance. Months passed. Slowly. Painfully. We wrote letters. Short at first. Careful. Then longer, heavier with things we hadn't said out loud before. Regrets. Fears. Memories. Small, intimate details that stitched us together across distance and glass. I learned the shape of his guilt. He learned the shape of my loneliness. We didn't promise anything we couldn't keep. When the day finally came, quiet, unannounced, deliberately uncelebrated, I stood outside the gates with my hands shaking in my coat pockets. The air was cold, thin, the kind that made every breath feel deliberate. There were no reporters, no waiting cars, no cluster of people pretending not to stare. Just a stretch of concrete, a metal gate, and time moving slower than it ever had before. I kept checking my watch even though I already knew the schedule. I kept pressing my fingers deeper into my pockets, like I could anchor myself there. I told myself I was calm. I wasn't. Every sound made my heart jump. Footsteps behind me. The distant clatter of a door. The low murmur of voices I couldn't make out. I wondered, absurdly, if he would recognize me immediately, or if the months apart had changed me too much. If he'd hesitate. If I would. I replayed our last conversation in my head, the words looping until they felt worn thin. I choose you. Had I meant it enough to still be standing here? The gate opened with a dull mechanical sound. I looked up without realizing I'd been holding my breath. When he walked out, thinner, quieter, real. I was there. For a second, I barely recognized him, not because he looked unfamiliar, but because everything ornamental had been stripped away. No tailored coat. No confident stride designed to command space. Just Adrian, standing in plain clothes that hung a little looser than before, his shoulders set like he was bracing for impact that never came. His eyes found mine instantly. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. No crowd. No dramatic reunion. No music swelling in the background like a movie scene. Just us, standing a few feet apart, unsure how to bridge the space that had once been filled with contracts and rules and fear. The distance felt enormous. He stopped walking. I didn't move either. For a moment, I wondered if one of us was supposed to say something. If there was a correct first sentence for moments like this. Something that acknowledged everything without reopening wounds. Instead, silence stretched. He looked at me like he wasn't sure I'd stayed real too. Like I might dissolve if he blinked. You waited, he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered. Not broken. Just honest. I chose, I replied. The words came easily. They felt settled in me now, no longer something I had to convince myself of. A breath left him, slow, careful. He nodded once, like he was accepting something he'd already known but hadn't allowed himself to believe. We didn't rush. We stood there a moment longer, letting the reality settle around us. Letting the weight of what had happened, and what hadn't, find its place. I noticed small things, the faint scar near his temple I hadn't seen before, the way his hands stayed loose at his sides instead of tucked into pockets like he was afraid of hiding them. Are you okay? I asked quietly. He considered the question. I'm here. I smiled a little at that. That's a start. The walk away from the gates was slow. Side by side, not touching. Our shoulders close enough that I was acutely aware of the space between us, but neither of us crossed it yet. Every step felt deliberate, chosen. We learned each other slowly. Not in grand gestures or declarations, but in pauses and questions and small, careful truths. We sat on a bench nearby, the city humming at a distance, and talked like two people reintroducing themselves. What scared you the most? I asked him after a while. He didn't answer immediately. Then, that you'd move on before I had the chance to become someone worth staying for. The honesty landed softly, but deep. And you? He asked. That I'd shrink myself again, I said. That I'd mistake waiting for living. He nodded, like he understood that fear intimately. The first time he touched me again wasn't urgent. Wasn't desperate. It happened later, when the sun dipped lower and the air cooled further. We were standing, about to part ways for the night, when his fingers brushed my wrist. It was accidental. Or maybe it wasn't. Either way, he froze immediately, his eyes flicking to mine, searching. I didn't pull away. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent, his fingers brushing my wrist like he was asking permission from the past as much as the present. The contact sent a quiet shiver through me, not sharp or overwhelming, just deeply felt. Is this okay? He asked. Yes, I said. It is. Every touch came with eye contact. With breath held. With the quiet understanding that we could stop any time. That nothing was owed. That nothing had to be proven. We talked more than we touched. Long conversations stretched late into the night, sitting across from each other with mugs gone cold, words filling spaces that had once been occupied by tension. We talked about who we were without power. Without leverage. Without lies. I don't know how to be ordinary, he admitted once, staring into his cup. I reached across the table, not touching, just close. Neither do I. But we can learn. We talked about what scared us. He told me about the silence that followed him now, how strange it felt not to be constantly watched. I told him about the fear of wanting something and losing it again. We talked about what we wanted. Peace, he said after a long pause. And honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. I nodded. Connection that doesn't cost me myself. There were moments of tension too, hesitations, misunderstandings, the occasional instinct to retreat. Sometimes he went quiet, old habits resurfacing. Sometimes I braced for abandonment even when there was no sign of it. We named those moments when they happened. I'm pulling away, he said once, catching himself. I noticed, I replied gently. But I'm still here. And he stayed. And when he finally held me without fear, without contracts, without secrets, when his arms wrapped around me not to possess but to protect, I felt it settle in my chest like a long exhale. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't overwhelming. It was steady. His hand rested at the small of my back, warm and sure. My cheek pressed against his shoulder, fitting there in a way that felt natural, earned. I felt his breath slow, felt the tension ease from his frame inch by inch. For the first time, there was no edge to it. No countdown. No terms. Just presence. It felt like home. Not the kind you're born into. The kind you build. Brick by brick. Choice by choice. With patience and courage and the willingness to stay even when it would be easier to run. Because sometimes the most dangerous love isn't the one that ruins you. It's the one that asks everything of you, and makes you brave enough to choose it anyway.